Trump supporters and QAnon believers have a new theory on how Trump will be, quote unquote, reinstated to office. A military coup. Let's take a listen.
Biden is he's like a puppet president. The military is in charge. It's going to be like Myanmar. What's happening in Myanmar? The military is doing their own investigation, and at the right time, they're going to be restoring the republic with Trump as president.
What's going on in Myanmar right now? The government took over and they're redoing the election, correct? So, that could possibly happen here, possibly.
Would you like to see it happen?
Absolutely.
I would like to see it happen.
Really?
Yes.
You know why? Because the election was stolen from us.
All right, Democratic strategist and senior VP at Firehouse Strategies, Michael Starr Hopkins, and senior news producer at the Daily Signal and visiting fellow and Independent Women's Forum of the Independent Women's Forum, Kelsey Bohler, join us now to discuss. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Kelsey. Let me start with you, Kelsey. Let's talk about what we just heard on camera there. How widespread do you think those sort of like intense suspicions to the point where people believe that Donald Trump can or should be reinstated through a military coup? How widespread do you think those actually are on the right or in the conservative movement in the Republican Party? Do you think that this is isolated to a few kooks, or do you think this is something that the party should broadly be really concerned about?
I absolutely acknowledge that this is out there. I do think it's incredibly isolated to the point that I am a bit disappointed that the Hill even wants to cover it and give this sort of conspiracy theory any more oxygen. Of course, you know, it's no surprise CNN is leading the coverage on this, and it really, you know, doesn't reflect any legitimate thinking on the right about any of this for that matter. And more importantly, it doesn't have any connection to people's actual lives. There are so many other more important issues we could and should be discussing today. Rising gas prices, the border crisis, the housing shortage crisis, inflation. There's so many other issues that come to mind that really impact Americans' everyday lives. And I fear that the media's emphasis on these very fringe, conspiracy-minded individuals does nothing but give them more encouragement and more oxygen to, empower them in these crazy antics.
Kelsey, what do you make of Mike Flynn's kind of floating of this? And I sympathize with your point, and I always kind of debate within myself about, you know, when it's appropriate to flag something as bubbling up and newsworthy and potentially dangerous, and when doing that actually has a feedback effect that actually then produces the thing that you're saying is dangerous.
Absolutely. And that's why the first thing I said is I acknowledge that this is real and it is out there, but it is so fringe and crazy that I don't think it does anyone any good to continue covering it. I listened to Michael Flynn's remarks that he made on stage. It was kind of difficult to make out exactly what he was saying. It was very brief. What's most important about those remarks is very shortly after he issued a strong denial that he supports any sort of military coup to reinstate former President Trump into office. And so if he is flat out denying that that is what he intended to say, what is the news story here? I think it's nothing but sensationalist journalism.
So, Michael, I have a question about how Democrats should be dealing with this. And you can answer also how widespread you think it is. But I'm also curious for your take. I mean, when I was out on January 6th covering the protest, which turned into a riot, I was talking to people who had never voted before and who weren't necessarily dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, people, creatures of the conservative movement. And I think it's probably fair to see some of this conspiratorial thinking in the frame of declining institutional trust. And that's something Democrats have to deal with as well. And so as you're looking at this, as a Democratic strategist, somebody whose job it is to understand voters and to think about how to talk to voters, what do you think Democrats should be saying to the country when there are, groups of people who are starting to be much more attracted to some of these ideas?
I think Democrats have to be very intentional about rebuilding that trust and talking directly to voters, going to where voters are and really explaining their policies and prescriptions and how we're going to repair a lot of the brokenness that is part of this country. But in turning back to the QAnon supporters, I think that there is a mainstreaming of this to some degree. When you look back at the bombings at Oklahoma or, in Waco, there's this conspiratorial thread that has gone through kind of the libertarian / fringe elements of the Republican Party. But now you have a president who's talking about how he's going to come back to power through a coup. You've got the former National Intelligence Director talking about, a potential coup, while his brother is still a general in the military. I think it's easy to dismiss this as kind of, Washington being Washington, but they're really big players within the country that are pushing this and continuing to talk about it in a way that they see as, I think, joking or maybe, manipulating the media. But there are people who are scared and who are vulnerable and who are really falling into this trap. And I think that's where the danger comes, when you have kind of lone wolf people who buy into this and then act on it.
Yeah, Michael, that's kind of what tipped it for me into something that's actually worth talking about, was that, Maggie Haberman reporting that Donald Trump has been telling people close to him that he's going to be reinstated in August as president. I think that that's a fringe, crazy, completely nutso idea. But he is the leading figure of the Republican Party at this point, and I guess we could, deplatform him from every, organ that we can think of. But he's still going to talk to people, and it's still going to eventually get into the news. And I guess we could continue to try to ignore it. But Kelsey, what do you make of the idea that Trump himself has been telling people that he thinks he could be reinstated in August?
Yeah, do you think that's a legitimate report from Maggie Haberman, or do you think that's sort of one of her more questionable pieces of reporting?
Although, people who bet against Maggie's reporting often lose a lot of money. It turns out to be pretty darn accurate.
Okay, she was also peddling the Russian collusion conspiracy theory for quite some time, which turned out to be incredibly incorrect. And my question I would pose to you all is, who are her sources? Where is this story coming from? I saw her tweet. I didn't see it backed up by any legitimate sources. I know she's a reporter for the New York Times and wouldn't put that information out there lightly. But that said, we know in politics, there are a lot of individuals with their own motivations to put these types of narratives out there, which of course are very harmful to the former president. Again, Michael Flynn denied that he supports this in any way. We haven't seen any sign that former President Trump would support a military coup. These are all so crazy. I mean, take a step back and use your common sense. Would former President Trump really support using a military coup to reinstate him back into office? That is crazy, and that doesn't sound like legitimate journalism to me.
I just want to push back on that.
Go ahead, Michael.
Just for a second, because it's not that crazy. I mean, we had President Trump stand on the lawn at the White House and call the people who were storming the Capitol good people. I mean, he has at every turn, when he could have lowered the tension, raised the tension. And we certainly haven't heard a denial from President Trump when it comes to Maggie Haberman's story. So the idea that this would be something that he would at least play footsies with, I don't think is crazy. Now, is there going to be a military coup? We pray to God no, and there's no reason to believe there would be one. But he certainly loves to amplify these things and kind of push it to the point of where there's a question.
I think those are two completely different things. Does Trump really think that he's going to be reinstated by the military? No, he knows the military doesn't even like him. But does he think he can get a news cycle or two out of it and fire up his supporters? That's good luck dismissing that one.
Go ahead, Kels.
The media loves to put him in these impossible lose-lose situations where he either gets in trouble for not issuing a strong denial on this crazy conspiracy theory, or he does issue a strong denial and then grants this conspiracy theory legitimacy. Either way, he loses, and the media sets him up for this every time.
Yeah, I agree that there is sort of a process that unfolds often where there's an allegation sort of laundered through a corporate reporter that then Trump has to respond to. For me, again, there was a different level of gravity when you have Sidney Powell on stage saying what she said over the weekend. But I'm on sort of, I'm of two minds about this. It's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around how widespread this is in the party. And your all's insight was so helpful. So stick with us. We'll be right back with more from Team Rising.